Welcome to the Patron Saints of Pop Culture podcast. I'm Miguel Covarrubias.
And I'm Kathy Covarrubias. And today, let's talk about the Netflix hit In the Tall Grass.
Thank you so much for listening to us. And don't forget to review and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform.
And I also want to say a welcome to those of you who came to us from Stuff Mom Never Told You. They gave us a shout out on their Feminist Movie Friday Alien Edition episode.
And if we have time at the end, we will give you a couple of shout outs for other podcasts that are doing similar things to what we're doing, except for things that we may not actually talk about, like ancient literature or Alien, for that instance.
Even though I really want to watch Alien now, because I actually haven't seen the first Alien movie.
The last time I did, I was like 12, so
yeah,
it's been a while.
The stuff that they mentioned in their episode, I don't know, I'm like really intrigued, and I'm like, now I have to watch it.
Dig into it a little bit further.
Mm-hmm,
yep. Speaking of which, what are we going to actually talk about today? Well, for instance, I'm going to be talking about breaking the cycles and how this fits into the horror genre of breaking the cycle.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to be talking about the effects of isolation and separation, specifically for In the Tall Grass, and then also real-world examples.
We will then give you our Saints of Show.
And then, of course, we'll go ahead and give you the details on how to reach out to us on the social media.
So, spoiler alert, if you have not yet seen In the Tall Grass, it is available on Netflix and has been since, I think, the beginning of this month. Mm-hmm. It is, well, we'll get into that in the review here. So, let's summarize it for those of you who may not have seen it and just want to hear us talk about it first.
Or even just like a little recap of those of you who have seen it but don't remember certain details.
Yeah. All right. So a pregnant woman and her brother hear a child in tall grass in a field and try to help him and end up getting stuck and lost in that field. A lot of bad things happen and the kid ends up coming out of the church and stopping them before they ever go into the tall grass.
All right. Well, that's a pretty good summary. Okay, now I got to think of something different. All right. Throughout time, many people... Don't laugh at me. I'm going to start over. Throughout time, many people have heard voices coming out of the tall grass. So they go to investigate to try to help these people. And then they find themselves in endless time loops. And they can't get out. And then the tall grass consumes them.
Okay.
The end.
All right, so...
I'm not wrong.
You're not wrong. My review is, I definitely enjoyed it. I think Stephen King, and especially when he's writing with his sons, it's usually it's going to be a good story. And I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit when I begin my segment, primarily because I really enjoy Stephen King and I enjoy his storytelling method. This is one of those horror movies that I enjoy where it's not like jump scares or it's not, like, oh my gosh, this is a horror movie. It's more of a, what's going on? Like, how does
you like the suspense part of it?
Yeah, the suspense part of it. More of a thriller rather than a
horror.
Horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, I really enjoyed it.
Okay. So I had to think about it because I'm one of those people who have to like digest movies before I can actually say whether I like it or not. I would say that I would put this at about a 60%, okay. It's not the best movie out there. It does kind of drag on sometimes. And if you're the type of person that needs to have a lot of different visual cues in order to keep you entertained, you're probably not going to like this movie because there's lots of grass and you see the same thing. You know what I mean? I do like the aspect of you not actually knowing what's going on at any point in time, because you're finding out the mysteries about the grass at the same time that the characters are, which I enjoyed. The one thing that I didn't necessarily like is it didn't provide a good satisfactory sandwich for me. As soon as we were done watching it, I was like, wait, so does that mean that there's two Tobins now running around in the universe at the same time?
More than that.
Well, I'm talking about outside of the grass. Are there now two
grass.
Tobins outside of the grass? Because,
Yeah.
so especially, I don't know, because they end up not going in, because the other people didn't go into the grass, it's all weird.
Mm-hmm.
Time loops. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. That's just how I think. And the fact that they weren't able to answer that, and if there is two Tobins, like, I don't know, maybe I just think about these things too much.
Yeah, and I think this is more if you understand Stephen King's storytelling method, if you've read the Dark Tower series, it would make a whole lot more sense, I think, from that aspect, you viewing it from that lens.
So is there or is there not? I need to know the answer. Does that help you figure out if there's two Tobins or not?
Yes, but they would be from different universes.
So does each timeline, is that a different universe?
Yes.
But how do we know that? Because the people from the other universes interact with each other.
Yeah.
See, you shouldn't have to read other stories in order to figure out what's going on. That's poor storytelling, because this is supposed to be set aside from its own.
That's what I'm saying. But we're going too far down that rabbit hole. So
yeah. Anyway, so that's why I didn't like it, and now I think it makes more sense to people, because, I mean, it's different if you're watching a series, not seeing the movies before and not understanding what's going on. You know, this is supposed to be a standalone movie.
Well, this brings me to what I actually had to talk about. So I think this is a good place to move on. In the horror genre, the themes that are carried throughout usually are about breaking the cycles. And this can be seen primarily a lot in Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods took a lot of these tropes and kind of turned it on its head to kind of make a new story. To say, look at the horror genre. This is what we've been doing, and it's not really gotten any better or worse. And we're just appeasing old gods. In other words, let's make new stories. That's one of the things that I like about Stephen King, and I don't really remember where he said this, and I think this was in his book on writing, or it was in one of his author's notes at the end of one of his books. He had said that the way that he tells his stories is by putting normal people in abnormal circumstances. This is definitely a story of normal people in a very abnormal circumstance. And the Dark Tower series is not necessary to actually understand this. He's taking the whole cycle genre and he's adding it onto these characters and exactly what they're going through in their lives and how those cycles kind of persist in this actual story. So speaking of which, let's talk about the cycles that they actually have. Like with Becky and Travis, they were both really kind of running away from their circumstances, their consequences from their choices in their lives. Travis most obviously running away from Becky when she became pregnant.
But he comes back. He runs to her.
He runs to her and
only
finds
when
her
she
dead.
Disappears. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks to Tobin, which I think let's call him Stone Tobin, because Stone Tobin is the one that has the knowledge of the grass, and then the Tobin later is without that knowledge.
Yes.
So there are multiple instances of each of these characters, and they all interact with each other, like you said, but that's besides the point. That's later. So they're both running away from their consequences, and that takes them into these cycles of running away from having to deal with what's actually going on with them. Becky, it's having to deal with the fact that she's pregnant, she's going to have a child, and whether or not she actually wants to keep this child. I mean, that's a huge, huge weight that's weighing on her, whatever she's, kind of going through. And I can imagine that her family's probably pressuring her one way. She's probably pressuring herself one way. I don't know that Travis did, because Travis kind of disappeared until he didn't.
Well, I think they said in the movie that Travis didn't want her to keep it, which is why he left. Because at one point in time at the beginning of the pregnancy, she wanted to keep it. But now she's not so sure. Which is why she's going to San Diego to adopt out her child.
To give her child up for adoption.
Yeah.
And then you have Travis, who I'm not sure if Cal pressured him to run away, if Cal was kind of part of that kind of thing. I know that most guys go through this weird thing when they're about to have their first child. A lot of it is like, am I ready for this? Can I be a father? Can I break that cycle of my own father? Can
I provide for this child?
Exactly. Like we talked about was it last week or 2 weeks ago, that, I had that big freak out and you thought that I was leaving you home alone forever.
Yeah, it was 3 days.
It was an hour. So, like, these are normal people. These are normal things for people to be going through. And it's a very abnormal circumstance that they're in, being in this maze of tall grass. Speaking of Cal and pushing other people away, I think Cal in himself is running away from his own life. He's running away from the responsibility of living. Like, you don't know much about Cal beyond that he's living his sister's life. He's trying to make his sister's decisions for her, and that, he's trying to be the big brother or whatever for her, and it's not helpful. He's in a sense running away from himself.
Well, I think he is running away from the idea that now that they're adults, they need to go their separate ways. As kids, your siblings, and they're really close in age, so they're pretty attached to the hip. But at a certain point in time, siblings go off and do their own thing. And that's what's expected of you. And
I know that there is this idea of brothers protecting their sisters in these circumstances, but he's taking it to a whole new level. I mean, it's creepy.
Yeah, I didn't realize how creepy it was until the ballroom. Oh my gosh, the bowling alley scene.
Yeah. Which, by the way, if you have read the Dark Tower series, there's a connection to the Midway Lanes. I mean, there's a lot of connections between In the Tall Grass and the Dark Tower series. And in fact, the stone, I kind of believe either is a conduit or is a version of the Dark Tower in that universe. But I'm not going to go into those because it would take me forever, and I would love to talk about that all night long, and I don't want to do that.
You can have your own individual podcast just talking about that.
Talking about Dark Tower connections that I found in other Stephen King works. Yeah, I could do that. I don't think I will. Then you have Ross and his family, kind of this idea that, and I know this happens a lot more in 90s pop culture, late 90s pop culture, early 2000s pop culture, this kind of idea of modernity taking us away from the natural state of things. How a lot of people like avoid camping or avoid being out in nature. And so it takes them away from what is really natural is your family. You see this by Ross kind of taking that phone call and being more absorbed in his work than he is in his family, and about the dog, Freddie, running away, and Tobin running after the dog, Natalie yelling at him, hey, your son's running off into this field of tall grass. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, frustrated and goes in there and becomes a murderous guy by touching the stone. I don't know that all versions of Ross kind of become.
I don't know, because there is, one version where Tobin is. So who knows? I don't know.
Yeah.
As far as we can tell, the majority of the story timelines involve Ross.
Ross. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think this is kind of evident in that, is that idea of that modernity versus nature kind of thing, that this civilization versus what's going on. And I think this has a lot to do with climate change. A lot of those ideas kind of play into the story concept, the themes that usually go hand in hand with those character tropes, those ideas. So there were a lot of these running cycles that were brought up in this movie, running away from their responsibilities. Do you have anything in your own life that you kind of resonate with? Any of things that you kind of run away from in your own life?
Like things that I run away continuously from?
Yes.
I would say the thing that I run away from the most is, well, it's more like I'm hesitant of it. And it would be forming new friendships. I'm a little hesitant on. I don't necessarily run away, but if the other person isn't invested in the relationship the same way I am, I definitely just leave.
Okay.
Like I don't even pursue it. If I see that there's even like one little hole of it not working out, I'm just like, nope, sorry, I'm gone.
Yeah, I can see that. Though I don't think you give yourself enough credit. I think you do try a little bit more than most people do.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
For me, it's definitely when I get stuck on something, when I get to a problem that I can't figure out, that I can't get past, that I tend to just drop the project altogether. That, I end up having a lot of half completed projects because I get frustrated and I can't, move past a certain problem.
Or
and I don't know how to ask for help.
It.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that happen too, where you just get stuck on a problem and you can't like move past it, which is again its own kind of cycle in a way.
Yes, and something I can't break out of.
Yeah, so at the point where I'm like, okay, let's just move on.
Speaking of moving on, let's move on to.
I wasn't meaning that way, but okay.
Yeah. So. In essence, there was a lot of fighting with themselves. And I think this kind of brings into the movie is a lot more of the heady aspect of the movie is, in a sense, they all kind of represent different parts of ourselves rather than just, different characters, how one interacts with other people. It's more interpersonal rather than intrapersonal. Is that the way to say it?
Sure.
For instance, you have Ross, Natalie, and Tobin versus Becky, Cal, and Travis for kind of this family values kind of thing. That you have this old idea of a nuclear family. You've got, the father, the mother, and the son.
And the dog.
And with Becky and Cal and Travis, you've got a pregnant woman and her brother and her significant other. I'm pretty sure that they're not married.
No, they're not married.
Boyfriend, girlfriend. And this is obviously going in the face of that traditional, nuclear family kind of idea where, well, Cal kind of makes it creepy a little bit. And, it's not the same old. You also see this in all of Becky's encounters. Becky encounters, I believe that she encounters herself at one point, but, it's never really seen on screen.
It specifically says unknown.
It's unknown. Mm-hmm. For me, it's, I believe that she sees, herself. It's, encountering with Ross, that idea of her own modernity and her own career, her own idea of, self-independence, her encountering of Tobin and of being a mother, of encountering all of these different ideas, within herself as she's struggling with being pregnant and about to give birth. So I know that there's each of these characters, but I'm running out of time, and so we need to move on. So what are you usually most critical of yourself about?
Everything? Is that fair?
You said it was going to be a longer answer when I asked you this earlier.
Well, here's the thing. We're shut on time, so I'm just going to say everything.
Okay. And do you find that each of those things kind of takes on their own character in your mind?
Like the things
do you ever have arguments with yourself? Like somebody holding this idea and then another holding this
myself idea? Definitely agrees with myself.
Oh, okay. Myself tends not to agree with myself. I tend to argue with myself a lot. A lot of different ideas. Well, this could actually happen, but no, this is what's happening. Let's take the logic. Let's take the emotion. Let's kind of like argue with each other kind of thing.
Which will sometimes cause you to get stuck.
Which will cause me to get stuck, which will get me caught in those cycles that I have to break out of. So, yeah, I had a lot to say about this movie. I really enjoyed it.
All right, so I guess that means it's my turn. So, what I'm going to talk about, I have my own theories in terms of what caused all of this to happen. I don't have anything about the time loops per se, but more about the characters themselves and what could have happened. So, yes, we do know that Ross, am I saying that right?
Ross, yes.
Ross. For some reason, I always want to say Ross and Russ, and I don't know what the difference is between the two. It's okay. I think it's because I say my vowels weird, because I'm from Montana. Anyway.
Well, it could be a little bit of that dyslexia that, affects you, so.
That's true, yep. Anyway, so that guy, we know that he touched the stone, and then after he touched the stone, he goes a little cuckoo. And decides that everybody else needs to touch the stone and he needs to get her baby out of her. But I think, too, that something that could have maybe exacerbated what he was going through was the fact that when they're in the grass, there's times, and we don't know like how actually long it is because of the weird time loops, but there had to have been some time when he was isolated. And being isolated from people, being in a strange environment, being in an environment like tall grass where it makes you feel claustrophobic, that can do a ton of bad things to your psyche. Absolutely. I know I wouldn't like to be in that scenario. So,
because it heightens the cortisol and testosterone that go along with stress.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're like in a fight or flight, but you're mostly.
But you're stuck.
Fighting. Yeah, you're stuck. You can try everything, but you can't actually make progress. And humans, we're social creatures. We like to interact with other people. Even though some of us are introverts, we still enjoy a good human conversation, good interaction with people. And this is actually something that we have developed in terms of to try to help our humanity, our like population actually grow, because it is a lot safer for humans to be with other humans than it is for us to be out there by ourselves. Safety in numbers type of a thing, which is why a lot of women still go to the bathroom with all of their friends, because it's safety in numbers.
Yeah.
So it's just something that we have developed over time, because it ultimately is the best way to survive. So as an introvert yourself, I know, surprise, do you feel the need to socialize? And if you do or don't, why and why not?
Well, yes and no. So it's more that I desire more, deeper connections rather than just surface level. How was the weather? How was your family doing? Small talk is just like, it means nothing. And so therefore it's a waste of time for me.
But think about this. How do you get to know somebody well enough to have those deeper conversations if you don't start off with the small talk?
Yeah, see, I don't know. And I think that's why most introverts are like, yeah, well, I'm fine with being by myself because, I can actually have conversations with myself. So,
but even most introverts will say that they still get some kind of social interactions out there. Like nowadays, a lot of introverts get their social interaction from online or from just their immediate family. Like they're still getting some kind of interaction. They're not just like hermits.
Well, I'm not suggesting that we're hermits, but
okay.
Yeah, it's like, because that's parties and large groups of people, it's too much input. There's a lot of input and none of it is meaningful.
Yeah. Well, to you. To me, I almost need that juice sometimes. Not all the time. I'm like an omnivert, so I'm in between introvert and extrovert, and I go through phases depending on like the time of year, and like my moods and that kind of stuff. So I kind of get what you're saying. All right. So now to go more into a serious topic, something that I kind of tend to go on tangents on. So I'm going to try to keep it to a minimum. If you've listened to the podcast before, you probably know how passionate I am in regards to criminal justice reform, especially when it comes to our prisons and our jails. So I'm going to specifically talk about solitary confinement because I feel like this ties into the show a little bit more than anything else. With solitary confinement, there is a ton of studies out there that show how bad it is and the effects that it has on people's psyche, both like while they're in solitary confinement as well as even years after they get out of prison and are no longer in solitary confinement. I mean, it's sad. Like if you just even read a couple of these studies, it's just heartbreaking. So right away, it's reported that solitary confinement can cause hypertension, headaches, migraines, profuse sweating, dizziness, and heart palpitations. And then further on, after solitary confinement, it actually decreases emotional intelligence, increases your chance of getting PTSD, decreases empathy, increases your likelihood of getting panic attacks and depression and paranoia and hallucinations.
I think you just described a lot of what they were going through.
Yeah, absolutely. Like everything, like every single character like went through something that I listed on here. Well, probably not PTSD because
well, I'm sure that after the fact. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. After the fact, I can see them getting it.
Tobin is going to have some serious therapy bills in his future.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So, and also too, as you can imagine, all of those things that it causes is probably not the best thing for recidivism rates. Mm-hmm. You know, the whole point of our jail and prison system is to, quote, you know, rehabilitate our criminals so then they don't do crimes ever again. But when you throw people into solitary confinement, which is more and more common nowadays because of the supermax prisons, I mean, when they have decreased emotional intelligence, for example, the chances of them doing another crime increase. So it's doing the exact opposite. I would imagine, I couldn't find any studies specifically linking those things, but I mean, people who tend to do violent crimes tend to, you know, not be as emotionally aware, I guess, or sympathetic.
Well, if it lowers empathy, I think empathy is really what keeps us from doing those things. And that's here in my armchair psychologist mode here is that it keeps us, that's what separates us from the animals in a sense, is that we're able to understand that, that business owner is probably struggling. It's a mom and pop shop. You know, they're probably having trouble paying their own bills. Mm-hmm. You know, I shouldn't steal from them because, you know, they're also in kind of the same problem.
Exactly. Yeah, man. And I could just go on and on. The fact that solitary confinement is becoming more and more common just like blows my mind. Like it doesn't do anybody good. Even if they do see, because sometimes you will see like some improvement in the prisoner, but it's a very short term. And like solitary confinement is like for a few hours, you know, it's basically get them in there, get them time to calm down, but then they need to come back out.
Well, I mean, that's a really hard area to be in. Like rewards or punishment are, you know, which ones are going to cause the better effects for the whole system. Mm-hmm. And I mean, as parents, this is something that we struggle with. You know, our kid we're trying to make sure that his behavior is, you know, societally acceptable.
Yep.
And should we work on rewards or should we punish him with timeout, you know, kind of thing.
And he goes back, and the thing with raising a kid is 1 week, something will work for you. And then the next week, it's like it doesn't even faze him. And so you got to figure out something else. And since we have totally have agreed not to do any type of like physical punishment, like that is taken out automatically. Yeah. And you can only do timeouts in different ways so many times before you just run out of ideas. But we're getting it. Our current way to discipline him, our timeout version, I think is doing its job. I say that now. We'll report back next week and let you know if it's still that way.
It may be different.
Yeah. So obviously, going back to the isolation and separation. Well, and separation too, when you are separated from somebody you have strong connections to, whether that's your sibling or your parents, or even like losing your child in a field of grass. Like I can imagine the type of anxiety and panic that would bubble up and bring out. Mm-hmm. Have that in addition to having that isolation feeling. I mean, I don't blame them.
Yeah.
You know, I don't blame them for the way that they were acting. Obviously, I don't think that you need to kill people based on that.
Ross.
Yes. Technically, Cal does too.
Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. For a couple of times.
Many times.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a pile of them.
Yeah, there's a pile of Travises that saves that one Travis.
Can you imagine, like...
landing on a pile of yourself?
Yes. How psychologically damaging that would be?
Well, that's why Travis decided to stay back, I think.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
The self-sacrifice. He's like, I'm already dead, so...
He's like, I can't go into the real world knowing what I know. Yeah. I just gotta stay back. Anyway, so, in your opinion, Are there cases where solitary confinement would be okay?
No. In my opinion, no, it's not. I don't think it's a good punishment. And even in timeout, we're not separating him from us. It's more or less that, he's getting to an area where he's, can calm down. He can take a moment for himself.
Eliminates distractions.
And we're still here. Mm-hmm. Like, we're still willing to listen to him and talk to him while he's in timeout. So, yeah, just eliminating the distractions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I don't know that timeouts will work for prisoners, but,
Well, some people like to call prison big boy timeout.
Well, I don't know who calls it that, but okay.
So sometimes when I'm bored, I watch snippets of the Dr. Phil show.
Oh, okay.
I know. You can judge
so
me. It's
Dr.
okay.
Phil calls it big
No.
boy timeout.
There was a guest on his show, and one side of the family was telling the kid that his dad was in big boy timeout. And then the other side of the family was like, no, he's in prison. And like they were fighting over like the terminology.
Okay. Well, and yeah, you just have to be honest with your children. Anyway, let's move on.
Yes. So in my opinion, I would agree with you, obviously, based on everything that I just rattled off. And if you want to learn more yourself, all you have to do is Google the effects of solitary confinement, and you will find a whole slew of articles, both through news outlets as well as scholarly articles as well too. Read up on it. Be as passionate about it as I am.
Yeah.
We'll start a club.
So let's move on to our saints of the show. Who do we find to be the saint out of all of this? Mm-hmm. For me, I believe it was Tobin, and I'm going to go with the Tobin that did not touch the stone. We're going to say Saint Tobin, the kid who was just a kid. And, he loved his dog, and he wanted his dog to, be safe. And he was, a good caregiver to his dog. And then he saved these total strangers, Becky and Cal, who'd never met him, even though he had met them. It's complicated.
Yeah.
So those were his two miracles for me.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and give the sainthood to Freddie the dog.
Okay.
Because he's a good boy.
Well, and all dogs are good boys. So.
Yes, all dogs are good dogs. But I wanted to make sure that he was pointed out because ultimately him running through like that one patch of grass like gives them the idea that there are paths like in the grass, they just can't see it.
Yeah.
And how the dog actually gets out to the road at one point in time. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that in itself is a miracle. He's just a dog wandering around and he's probably confused and scared too. And I don't know, I just have a soft spot for dogs. They're good boys.
I'm not going to go into it, but there's another connection to Dark Tower there. And since they're in the middle of Kansas and
you're like I said, you're just going to have your own podcast where you just talk to yourself.
Talk to myself about Dark Tower connections.
If you want that podcast, just let us know. Should we give them the ways to tell us if they want to hear that or not?
Well, let's talk about let's give our two shout outs and then we'll give them ways of telling us more if they know any of the podcasts that are like ours.
All right.
So you first talked about Stuff Mom Never Told You. And is this a series that they do of Feminist Movie Fridays?
They're thinking about it from what she said on that episode. Obviously, it's one of those things probably that if they get a good enough review on it, they'll probably continue to do it. I hope that they do. But it sounds like she wants to do it, or maybe she'll do like a spinoff. So I'll keep you guys informed of what I hear.
Well, and they talked about Alien, which is, and they did what we do is kind of go into it and pick it apart a little bit and kind of talk about what's going on with it and what's going on in our society with it. Mm-hmm.
The major themes, the things that you might not have realized or noticed. The things that the directors have actually put into it as well. So, yeah, it was really well done. And
give you another one that I just discovered, and they seem to be a newer podcast called Why Do We Read This? And they take older literature and talk about like plays and different forms of literature and do the same thing that we do, which is pull them apart, kind of talk about how it fits into today's society, why you need to keep reading these pieces of literature, why it's good or why it's bad, those kinds of things. And I think that everything in our society is art. Art can be picked apart and you can pull something from it.
Well, it's supposed to be. It's meant to be.
Yeah, exactly. Even if it's bad art, it may not be bad art to somebody. It may, hold significance to somebody.
That's true. Yeah, I have to remember that because I do trash talk a lot of bad things.
Yes. Though Michael Bay movies, I have no idea what the significance they would hold
I have
is.
no problem. No problem with that.
We'll call that the only piece of bad art is Michael Bay films. But if you know of any other podcast that is doing what we're doing is talking about pop culture and how that fits into your own personal, like, daily lives and how you can, kind of pull that apart and use it in your own life, let us know.
Yeah. And you can reach us at Facebook at Patron Saints of Pop Culture. Also on Instagram at Patron Saints of Pop Culture. We also have our website, patronsaintsofpopculture.org.
Thank you again so much for listening, and don't forget to review and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And so with all of that being said, we invite you to come and join the conversation.
Bye.